So now I'd like to welcome back Rob Trasinski to the stage for his session entitled The Lego Theory of Life, Objectivism Applied to Lifestyle, Gender, and the Crisis of Meaning. Everybody, let's give it up for Rob Trasinski.
Can you all hear me now? Okay, good. I'm delighted that I have walk-on music for this. I wanted the theme from Rocky, but that's anyway. So let me get this first. Did I get the first image up here? All right. All right. So many people today proclaim themselves to be lost. So there's a widespread discussion of what they call a crisis of meaning. There's a couple of examples here. And this crisis of meaning in which we've lost the old mythologies that used to hand down to us our basic ideas about the nature of the world and our proper role in life. And so, for example, a poll published a few years ago, people who describe their religious beliefs, this is in America, people who describe their religious beliefs as nothing in particular, and that's a combination of atheists, agnostics, and those who simply drifted away from established religion. They've become the largest and fastest growing group of Americans, nearly a third of the population, larger than evangelical Christians. And what you're seeing here, this graphs are various projections under different scenarios showing that nothing in particular may soon be a majority of religious beliefs in America. Gurus have rushed in offering rules for life, and I had an image for, some people might recognize Jordan Peterson put out a book called Rules for Life, 12 Years for Rules for Life, offering it, and in the subtitle says, offering it an antidote to chaos. And they're trying to sort of take these bewildered young people, and especially young men, and herd them into a kind of artificially reconstructed version of traditional roles. And since this is particularly young men, it is largely an artificially reconstructed version of masculinity. Do I have my images back? Not yet, okay. All right. So, for all these lost young people who've been pursued by, and all these lost young people have been pursued by politicians who eagerly offer them a way to find meaning in their lives by agitating for a social cause, though the cause often ends up beginning and ending with adulation for the politician himself. Right, so the dilemma, if I could sum this up, the dilemma we face in the modern world, which the gurus and the politicians are exploiting, can be stated simply. We have a greater capacity that, we're okay, now we're a little forward of where I wanted to be, that's fine. The dilemma we face in the modern world, which the gurus and politicians are exploiting, can be stated simply. We have a greater capacity than ever before to do anything we want, but no idea what to do. Now, there's a libertarian writer named Aaron Ross Powell who's come up with, I think, a really intriguing analogy for this dilemma, so I stole it. And I'm stealing it with attribution. I should mention Aaron is a Buddhist, and this is what he offers as his answer to that dilemma I just described. Similarly, one of the other images I showed you earlier about the meaning crisis, that guy is also pushing Buddhism as the answer. I'm not going to try to sell you on Buddhism today, but I do think that Aaron Ross Powell has come up with this great analogy for describing the problem, if not the answer. So he says, Aaron imagines a child with an interest in building Lego sets. And I'm just going to quote from him here. He says, quote, imagine for your birthday, 2 different relatives each give you some Lego building blocks. Your uncle picked out a set that builds a cool car. So now we're caught up on the images here. But before wrapping it, he opened the package, took out the pieces, assembled them together according to the instructions, and then glued the finished car together. Thus, your gift from him is a Lego car, but only ever that. All right, so what's the alternative? Well, he goes on. Quote, your aunt picks out the same Lego set, but before giving it to you, she opens the package, takes out just the bricks, tosses those into a new bag, and then throws out the box. Let me see if I can, okay, I seem to have, there we go. Throws out the box with the picture of the car as well as the instructions. Thus, your gift from her is a pile of Legos you can do whatever you want with, but without a sense of what you're supposed to build or how to build it, unquote. Now, he then posits a third relative. All right, there we go. He then posits a third relative who gives you what you actually wanted, which is the same Lego set with its instruction book, with a reminder you can build the car exactly as the instructions describe, but also that Legos are intended to be used creatively, so you can modify the design or build something new if you like. So that's the analogy, and I think I kind of call this the Lego theory of life. And actually, I pointed out to Aaron that the Lego people themselves made a Lego movie about 10 years ago, which had exactly that theme. I'm not going to particularly recommend the movie. It's a little goofy, and one of the running gags is it prominently features a song that's deliberately designed to be as annoying as possible. So watch at your own risk. But you can see how this Lego analogy applies. Traditional religion is the Lego car that comes glued together. It's a set of beliefs and a role in life delivered to you pre-assembled and to be adopted without question or change. The bag of undifferentiated Legos is the modern idea that humans have no definite identity. Everything's subjective, therefore guidance and principles are unnecessary, possibly even an obstacle. The rules just stifle your creativity, man. The limits of this analogy is that the real third alternative is not exactly an instruction book. It's not a concrete set of rules or steps to follow. What we need are broad principles. What we need is an intellectual perspective that will help us to understand the world and to understand human nature and help us discover the basis for making our own decisions about what to make out of our lives. Now, for me, this analogy to Legos has the benefit of reflecting the concrete reality of the last 12 years or so of my life as a father of two boys with a love for Legos, and that there's a sea of Legos in several rooms of our house. But interestingly, I did a little poking around about the history of Legos, and I found out the first Lego bricks were developed in 1949, and they required another decade or so of refinement and improvement, specifically aimed at giving them the versatility required for the kind of creative play that I just described. And the upshot is the modern Lego brick was patented. I was lucky to find the image from the actual patent application. Patented in January of 1958, which by coincidence is just a few months after the publication of Atlas Shrugged. Now you could say that's by coincidence, but it also reflects the fact that this was an era where this issue of individual creativity and initiative was being hotly debated and worried over. It was being grappled with by everyone from toy makers. This is Ole Kirk Christensen, the inventor of Legos. For everyone from toy makers to novelists and philosophers like Ayn Rand, image of her from about the same time. Ayn Rand developed her ideas in the process of writing best-selling works of fiction, The Fountainhead in 1943, Atlas Shrugged in 1957, that took on themes of conformity and tradition versus rationality and individualism, precisely the issues we're still grappling with now. When she wrote into the mouth of her hero in The Fountainhead the idea that, quote, every man creates his meaning and form and goal, unquote, she was anticipating the dilemma that has since come more fully into the open. Now, at the same time, she also wrote in a specific historical context, and it's primarily this sort of Cold War ideological contest between capitalism and socialism, the West and the East, and that caused her ideas to be associated with, in America, with the political right. And even very much against her own wishes, she was associated with conservatives. And this thing misleads some people about what Ayn Rand was really doing and why it's important. So when I say that Ayn Rand was not a conservative, I don't just mean she disagreed with them on a certain number of specific policy issues. It's that she approached things with a fundamentally different spirit. So neither her literature nor her philosophy was about recapturing some lost era and its traditional roles and beliefs. It was about creating your own meaning, as Howard Roark says. So in some fundamental ways, Ayn Rand was actually more fundamentally countercultural than the 1960s counterculture. And it's essential to understanding her whole philosophy. So it's the one thing I want to unpack today. Now, when we say, as Howard Roark does in The Fountainhead, every man creates his meaning and form and goal, what does that mean? How do you create your own meaning without it being merely subjective? On what basis would you build an objective meaning? So I want to take a look at the philosophical foundations for this idea. So I want to start by asking, what do we mean by meaning? Right, on the beginning level, what we mean by meaning in life is that you have a sense of what is, a view of the world and the way it works, and that provides a context for everything else you do. On the next level, meaning also includes a sense of purpose, a goal that seems worth pursuing, so you know what you're supposed to do. And finally, a sense of meaning in life isn't just intellectual, it's also something that's personally fulfilling on an emotional level. So we're going to draw on three main branches of philosophy. We're going to look at Ayn Rand's epistemology. If we're talking about meaning as a view of the world, a view of what is true, we need to know how we can know what is true. But if meaning also refers to a purpose, then we need to talk about Ayn Rand's ethics, her view of morality, what the proper purpose is of human life, and how an individual selects a purpose. Then finally, for meaning in the sense of emotional fulfillment, we need to look at how this is reflected in art. Ayn Rand used her fiction as a way of giving meaning to the actions of her characters, creating a model for her readers to follow. So let's start in on Ayn Rand's epistemology. How is the discovery of what is true an act of individual creation, a meaning you create for yourself, but without being subjective? And her answer here goes to the heart of her philosophy. It explains what she means by objectivity, the central idea her philosophy is named after. So there's a differentiation she makes between three approaches to philosophy, which she calls the intrinsic, the subjective, and the objective. So what is the intrinsic approach? Well, here's what she says about it in her Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. This is the chapter where she's talking about definitions, where you're just designating the essential characteristics that define a concept. How do you know what is essential? So she's summing up previous views. She says, the extreme realist, Platonist, and modern realist, Aristotelian schools of thought regard the reference of a concept as intrinsic, as universals inherent in things, as archetypes or metaphysical essences, as special existence unrelated to man's consciousness, to be perceived by man directly like any other kind of concrete existence, but perceived by some non-sensory or extrasensory means. Now, to boil this down into terms of our Lego analogy, this intrinsic view of truth is like the Lego set that is pre-assembled and comes already glued together. It requires no process from you, the individual, to discover or understand. You don't have to find the parts and put them together. There's no way for you to put them together in a different way. It's all handed down to you ready-made. The truth comes ready-made and pre-installed. Now, in practice, what that usually means is that there is some revelation, some document handed down from tradition in which the intrinsic truth has been disclosed for all time and which we just have to copy. Now, here's how Ayn Rand describes the subjective view of truth. She said, the nominalist and conceptual schools regard concepts as subjective, as products of man's consciousness, unrelated to the facts of reality, as mere names or notions arbitrarily assigned to arbitrary groupings of concretes on the ground of vague, inexplicable resemblances, unquote. So this is the bag of undifferentiated Legos that we're handed, with no instructions, no rules how to put them together, no model to show us what we're trying to achieve. And so you just put things together in random combinations. Now, Ayn Rand observed that these two approaches are usually considered the only two alternatives. Either truth is either intrinsic or it's subjective, but she gives a third alternative, which is the objective. And objective here doesn't just mean that something is true. It means that it is a truth arrived at through a process. So here's what she said. None of these schools regards concepts as objective, as neither revealed nor invented, but as produced by man's consciousness in accordance with the facts of reality, as mental integrations of factual data computed by man, as the products of a cognitive method of classification whose processes must be performed by man, but whose content is dictated by reality, unquote. So let's talk about what the word objective means in the way she's using it here. So objective means oriented to the object of cognition as opposed to the subject. Now, this is a bit of philosophical terminology. In any act of thinking, there is you, the subject, the consciousness that is doing the thinking. And there is the object, the thing out there independent of your consciousness, the external fact that you're thinking about. So to be objective means you are oriented to and guided by the objective thing, the thing out there independent of you. You're guided by the facts. But Ayn Rand's contribution is to insist that the subject is not passive in this process. You are guided by the facts, but you are the one putting the facts together. You're the one seeking out the facts, testing them, classifying them according to your own purposes, and integrating them together into larger ideas and a larger worldview. So the truth is not just swallowed whole, as it is in the intrinsic view, it is chewed and digested by an active process. The truth is a human creation, even an individual creation, and everyone has to go through that process for themselves. So in short, everyone has to assemble their own Lego set of knowledge. You have rules and principles for how to do it, but you have to put all the pieces together yourself. Now, Ayn Rand also applied this distinction to ethics. Intrinsicism is the approach behind a duty ethics, the idea that you have to do something. You have to follow certain rules just because you must do them. Morality is ready-made and assembled, already engraved as thundering imperatives on a set of stone tablets somewhere. So subjectivism is the approach. Now, by contrast to that, subjectivism is the approach behind a hedonist or pragmatist ethics. There are no principles. You're making everything up according to the emotion or the expediency of a given moment. Morality is something decided upon arbitrarily, either by you as an individual or as a social consensus, the consensus of society. So what is the alternative to both of these positions? Now, it's the same framework as before. There are objective facts at the basis of morality, but morality, like truth, is a Lego set that has to be assembled by yourself and for yourself. Now, in this respect, the most interesting and revealing formulation of the objectivist ethics is from a relatively late article by Ayn Rand. It's called Causality versus Duty, published in 1970. And it's this essay that goes, I think, to the greatest lengths to describe the differences between objectivist ethics and a traditional ethics of duty. So in keeping with her approach to the truth, she sees reality, external facts, as providing a foundation that cannot be ignored or avoided, but she also is giving an active role to the human mind, in the case of ethics, specifically to the power of choice. So here is how she describes the basis for morality. Quote, she says, reality confronts man with a great many musts, but all of them are conditional. The formula of realistic necessity is, you must if. And the if stands for man's choice. If you want to achieve a certain goal. She explains what this means. You must eat if you want to survive. You must work if you want to eat. You must think if you want to work. You must look at reality if you want to think. If you want to know what to do. If you want to know what goals to choose. If you want to know how to achieve them. Unquote. So reality is the source of moral and ethical principles, but it's also shaped by individual human choice, the choice of one's goals. And here's, I think, the most interesting implication of that, and this is from the same essay, where she describes what we call the metaphysical attitude, the basic approach to reality behind her ethics. Quote, the disciple of causation faces life without inexplicable chains, unchosen burdens, impossible demands, or supernatural threats. His metaphysical attitude and guiding moral principle can be best summed up by an old Spanish proverb. God said, take what you want and pay for it. But to know one's own desires, their meaning, and their costs requires the highest human virtue, rationality. Unquote. Now, to take that thing, take what you want and pay for it. I think this is her really radical reversal of the conventional view of morality. People tend to think, her saying the virtue of selfishness, defending self-interest, is the most radical part of Ayn Rand's ethics. But that's small change compared to this completely different way of viewing what morality even consists of in the first place. In the conventional view, morality is primarily about rules, limits, punishments, and restrictions. And in this version, morality begins with taking what you want. Morality is a form of self-assertion. It's a creative individual choosing goals for himself. But then again, you have to remember both parts of the old Spanish proverb apply. You take what you want and you have to pay for it. Now, here she hastens to add, to know one's own desires, their meaning, and their costs requires the virtue of rationality. So we have the same pattern of objectivity. Objectivity is a unity, a unity of the activity of the subject as a thinking being, probing for answers and making choices, but doing so in the context of unalterable facts of reality. Now let's go to what we thought of as the last part we needed for a sense of meaning, and that is really the domain of art, to provide a vision for a certain kind of life or lifestyle. So Ayn Rand once described art as a model builder, that it takes abstract and theoretical knowledge, converts it into specific concrete form or image in a sculpture or a painting or a character in a fictional story. She described in the Romantic Manifesto why we need this kind of model. Quote, since man lives by reshaping his physical background to serve his purpose, since he must first define and then create his values, a rational man needs a concretized projection of these values, an image in whose likeness he will reshape the world and himself. Art gives him that image. It gives him the experience of seeing the full, immediate, concrete reality of his distant goals. Now notice how this begins. It begins by saying, since man lives by reshaping his physical background to serve his purpose, since he must first define and then create his values. So we're creating our own meaning, defining and creating our values to serve our purposes. And that's our view of objectivity. Reality is immutable, but we have to actively build our understanding of reality and choose our goals. And art is a tool for creating that meaning by creating images and stories that capture this new worldview. So I want you to consider how Howard Rourke puts this in the Hero of the Fountainhead. When he's talking to a sculptor, Stephen Mallory, he's talking about why he likes this sculpture. He tells him, your figures are not what men are, but what men could be and should be. You've gone beyond the probable and made us see what is possible, but possible only through you. Now this is what Rourke means, or it's what Rand means by way of Rourke, about a man making his own meaning. It is what is possible, it's what men could be, so it's grounded in reality, but it's possible only through the creative thinking of the artist or innovator who sees this possibility and shows a new model for how to live. You need someone who is the first person to put the pieces together. So in Ayn Rand's aesthetic, she's not defending artistic traditionalism, but actually a relentless artistic innovation aimed at finding new combinations, new ways of living, new qualities of character that didn't exist or had not been identified before, at least not in such a clarified form. Now, if we were to ask what new form and meaning Ayn Rand found, now I have limited time, I could go on about this as a whole topic on its own. But the main one I would name is that she found heroism in productive work. She took the achievements of who were her heroes. They're architects and inventors and scientists and industrialists. And she took their achievements and she gave them a grand, epic, heroic meaning. She portrayed them the way other previous artists had portrayed knights in shining armor, or Homeric heroes crossing the seas and the oceans. And this was something that was implicit in the achievements of the Industrial Revolution, but no one had managed to really identify it before her, to fully identify it before her. Now, I talked earlier about how there's for the lost, people who are lost today, it's especially, there's a lot of appeal to young men who who are looking for a sense of masculinity. Ayn Rand offers a vision in which masculinity is less about putting in a lot of time at the gym and more about the relentless pursuit of a creative vision. It's about competence. It's about being able to stand by the integrity of your principles. But I would add something else that is very specific to Ayn Rand, which is that it was not just about masculinity, because she projected this heroism of work in characters who were women, which was an even newer social phenomenon in her time. The working woman. So in The Fountainhead, for example, there's Dominique Franken, who was partly inspired by the independent newspaper women that Ayn Rand knew in her own circle of friends around Isabel Patterson in New York City. Now, this is not Isabel Patterson. This is someone Ayn Rand would have known through Patterson, knew her at least indirectly, I think knew her directly as well. And this is Dorothy Thompson, a very successful reporter and broadcaster in the 1930s. So if you read The Fountainhead and there's Dominique Franken as this newspaper woman, everybody's talking about her, she's well known. This is the sort of person, real life person that she was basing that on. And Ayn Rand shows us this, especially in Atlas Shrugged, and the character of Dagny Taggart, who runs a railroad. This kind of career woman was still something of a novelty back then. It is much more commonplace today. And the thing is that people are still kind of freaking out about it. So that's why I wanted to sort of bring this back to how this connects to a lot of the culture war that's going on today. In recent years, there's been a resurgence or exaggerated emphasis, particularly in online spaces, of the intrinsicist approach to life. It's the idea there should be a model, a role already assembled for you, like the Lego car already put together and glued in place. And here's the important part. It's a role that you can just fall into or plug into without having to really think about it. Because it's a very online phenomenon, you can see it expressed in memes like this one. So this is something that was going around a while ago. This provides a series of old illustrations from the 1950s showing a highly idealized or aspirational version of the lifestyle of the time, and proclaims, as you can see there, once upon a time, a family could afford a home, a car, and send their kids to college all in one income. And of course, it's the man's income while the wife is staying home with the kids. Now, by the way, this idealization of the past is not very factually well-based. I could write a whole article, and actually I have written a whole article about how easy it would be to live on one income today if you lived at the actual much lower standard of living in America at the time that these illustrations were made. So, this idealized vision is not grounded in the facts. But it's not the factual accuracy people care about. And it's not really what you could afford or not. The appeal of this kind of meme is that it offers the Lego car that comes glued together. It's the appeal of a preset role in life that you don't have to question or think about. I'm just old enough to remember the sort of last vestiges or echoes of a world in which this could be taken for granted. If you were a young woman, you were expected to become a housewife or maybe go into a fairly narrow range of female jobs, nurse, secretary, receptionist. If you were a young man, it was expected you would take up a job similar to that of your father. Now, most of this crowd is probably too young to remember, but in the 1980s, the singer Billy Joel wrote a wistfully nostalgic song called Allentown, in which he lamented the supposedly dying world in which you had the great privilege of inheriting your dad's factory job. Now, this false nostalgia is very much alive today, so I just want to show one example that I did in the last couple days. If you were wondering what all the recent tariffs are about, with America putting all these tariffs on international trade, our current U.S. Secretary of Commerce, a guy named Howard Lutnick, described how he thinks Americans are all going to go back to these manufacturing jobs. And he says, "This is the new model, where you work at these plants for the rest of your life, and your kids work here, and your grandkids work here," unquote. So you see what I mean about this model, pre-assembled. We have your life course all planned out for you in advance. Now, I should also note that Howard Lutnick is living by this creed in his own way, because he just named his two oldest sons, who are both in their 20s, to top positions at his own big financial firm. So you see, this is kind of like almost a neo-feudalist outlook, where your position in life reflects your father's position in life, and it's all inherited from one generation to the next. Now, that's the vision for your career. Now, and in this older model, when it comes to your values, your social life, what you believed, well, this was also ready-made for you in the old view, because you went to church with your parents on Sunday. And it's really within my lifetime that all this has sort of come crashing down. So I talked at the beginning about the fading of religious belief. And there are other cultural changes that are connected to that, like the sexual revolution of the 60s. And the result is that a young person today has relatively few fixed cultural expectations or constraints on what kind of life he or she will live. From sexual preference to whether you get married, to what kind of job to take, or even whether to have a regular job at all, not to mention what to believe or what kind of values to live by. And for many of us, this is experienced as liberation. We have the whole world as a realm of choice. It's up to us to decide what meaning we will give our lives. We see this new freedom as a vast and liberating opportunity, a reward for centuries of economic and cultural progress. But for others, you can see how this would be experienced as complete bewilderment or an unpleasant imposition. With freedom comes responsibility. In this case, the awesome responsibility of deciding what meaning you choose to give your own life. And some people shrink from that responsibility. They look for the apparent safety of imitation. And they crave that predetermined role, a status, a position in life you can simply step into as a matter of course. And for some young men on the right, as I've noticed, that they view these roles not merely as an expectation imposed on you, but as an entitlement. They kind of resent the fact that, the house in the suburbs, the stay-at-home wife, the kids and the dog, the sort of thing we saw in this illustration, don't just fall into their laps. Now, of course, the counterpart to intrinsicism is subjectivism, and the subjectivist counterculture of the left has added to this sense of bewilderment, because it regards all major life choices as completely subjective. Not only are there no set gender roles, but there's no such thing even as gender. The currently influential postmodern view that tends to be associated with the cultural left is that everything is, quote-unquote, socially constructed. It's a subjective matter of social consensus, which can be constantly changed. And this very conspicuously fails to offer any guidance or any vision. One left-wing commentator talks about a world full of young people with no coherent vision of success, and talks about how many of them substitute political activism for any personal individual vision for their own lives. So what's the actual answer? So let's end on that. It is objectivity. It's this basic attitude in Ayn Rand's philosophy that I've been trying to describe, which is we need to train our capacity to think for ourselves about this new range of choices. It's no longer assumed we would naturally fall into pre-established ruts. If we now openly face the responsibility of choosing and therefore justifying a choice among a vast range of alternatives, then we need to know basically how to build our own Lego sets. We need to learn how to think for ourselves about these decisions. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living, and I think increasingly the unexamined life is no longer an option. A life with a wide range of possibilities to choose from means you have to examine what kind of life you want. And those of us who embrace this new era of choice and the extraordinary freedom it offers will have to show the way when it comes to learning how to deal with it. We have to show that it is possible when we are constrained only by the limits of nature, not by the limits imposed by coercion or social pressure or unthinking imitation. Now, for the actual content, the actual principles, we could go over the whole of Ayn Rand's writing and ethics and philosophy. But what I wanted to give you today is a sense of the spirit behind it, the framework for how to understand it. And I think I can sum it up, and I know you're closing in, and we're just a few minutes over. I'm almost done. I think I can sum it up in a favorite passage from The Fountainhead. And this is where Howard Rourke explains the meaning of life. He actually used those terms. And it goes like this. Quote, let me get the quote up there because you can follow along. Quote, Rourke got up, reached out, tore a thick branch off a tree, held it in both hands, one fist closed at each end. Then his wrists and knuckles tensed against the resistance. He bent the branch slowly into an arc. Now I can make what I want of it. A bow, a spear, a cane, a railing. That's the meaning of life. Your work, he tossed the branch aside. The material the earth offers you and what you make of it. Now, in that last phrase, we have the essence of Ayn Rand's view of objectivity, the central idea of her philosophy. The material the earth offers and what you make of it. She was pointing us to the material the earth offers, that's the constraint of an independent reality, and what you make of it, which is your element of creativity and choice. She was not offering a new dogma or a new prepackaged meaning to replace the old dogmas, nor was she proposing that you replace them with nothing. She was giving you the basis for creating your own meaning and form and goal. All right, thank you.
Let's give a round of applause for Rob Trasinski. So at this point, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. There we go. I see one over there.
Oh. My name is Robert Petrosian from Orange County, and I'm curious how you would say an objectivist would differentiate between traditions that are nothing more than second-hander talk versus traditions that are objectively helpful to a healthy society and a healthy individual.
Oh, that's a good question. So actually one of the conservative idea I like the best is, if you've heard of Chesterton's fence? Okay, so G.K. Chesterton is a Catholic intellectual from about 100, 120 years ago, turned to the 20th century. And he had this thing about how, saying, his viewpoint was, well, look, if the modern type of reformer, this is circa 1900, 1920, so we'll come along, he'll find, say, a barrier blocking a path in the woods. And he'll say, well, this is obviously old and outdated. We should get rid of this. He says, what I'd say to that person is, first go out and find out why was that barrier put there. And then once you know why it was put there in the first place, then maybe I'll let you take it away, because maybe you've actually found out that there's no good reason for it. But first find out why it was there, because maybe there was a good reason for it. And I think that's something we should do with traditions or traditional outlooks, traditional attitudes, traditional outlook, is we should be looking for, well, why was this invented in the first place? And actually, I used this against the conservatives in an article where I talked about Chesterton's freeway. I think that was the title I used. Where it's like, if you also find a place where the barriers have been knocked down and the ground has been made flat and a giant freeway has been put for people to go from point A to point B, before you say, oh my God, this is too much freedom, we have to get rid of it, first ask why people did that. Why did they feel the need to move back and forth along this freeway? So again, the point here, though, is everything has to be this is the very Enlightenment, the attitude that really comes from the Enlightenment. Just everything has to be subjected to argument and debate, and to be rationally proven, that nothing is accepted because it's traditional. It's accepted. If you have a tradition that you want to defend, you show, here's why we need it. This is the basis for it, and this is why we can't get rid of it.
Excellent. Do we have another question right over here?
Oh.
Thank you. So I definitely agree about I think the fence analogy is very good. But I had a question about the sort of the difference between the Aristotelian, like, sort of absolutism and then Ayn Rand's absolutism. And I forget the exact expression. It was like reference of concrete universe. I forget the exact term, but like things like truth, justice, the framework that allows you to choose what you're going to have to pay for what you want.
Yeah.
I guess if that's a human process and you have to sort of formulate those abstract but concrete things like truth and justice for yourself, then is the philosophy not absolute, or must everyone sort of arrive at like the same conclusion because they're working in the same objectivist framework, and then is it like a trivial form of Aristotelian like absolutism, or is there something I'm missing there, I guess?
Okay, so yeah, I think that that's good. So yeah, the question is, if you have to create, basically if you just have to discover the truth for yourself, will we all eventually arrive at the same place? And I think there's a degree to which that's true, that we will all eventually arrive to the same place because reality itself is the same, right? But I think there's a really important point in insisting on, and this is why she creates such emphasis on it, insisting on the idea that the fact that something is true is, the fact that something is true in reality, that you've discovered that something is true, doesn't really help the other person who's trying to find it, because he has to discover that truth for himself. And she points out that if you, there's one point in which she talks about, if you believe the truth is intrinsic, that it's just handed down without having to discover it, then you're going to think it's fine to just impose what's good on other people because they don't have to discover it for themselves. You know what's good for them, you're going to impose it on them. And it's that insistence on the idea that even if you arrive at the same truth in the end, the fact that you have to arrive at it, and that it can't function for you as a valid idea unless you've gone through the part of putting those parts together and understanding how you got there and why it's true. A truth imposed upon you from without, that you haven't gone through the process of understanding, doesn't actually function as truth for you. It just functions as a dogma. And that's one of the things she's insisting on. Now, the other thing, though, is that there are cases where, depending on your circumstances, depending on your personal characteristics, depending on what era of history you're in, there can also be changes where people will arrive at different conclusions based on different circumstances. And just take one clear-cut example, and I think I probably could come up with something better, but one clear-cut example is, what's the perfect job to have? Well, there's no one answer for everybody, right? Because the perfect job for me is going to be very different from the perfect job for you. We have followed different career paths, and that depends on your interests. It depends on your abilities. It depends on, there may be personal characteristics of where you grew up or what you were exposed to when you were young that set you off in a different direction than I would. So, there are a lot of things in life that are important like that, where the exact place and even if the reality we live in the largest picture is the same, there are different circumstances for us that will lead us to make different choices of different values within that shared reality, right? So, and that depending on your individual circumstances. So that's the sense in which it's important to have that outlook of, it is not just here's what the constraints out there of the world, but you are actively choosing and actively sort of seeking out the truth and the values.
We have time for about one more question. I think we've got it right over here with Isabel.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I really value the Lego analogy. And I was thinking, is there a possibility that there is a big section of the population that maybe just wants the Lego put together already? How would we argue against the possibility that a large part of the population is not so interested, perhaps, in doing the work themselves to put the Lego pieces together, at least on the very fundamental issues? Maybe there's a lot of people who want to have, a free range of decision when it comes to their career, but they don't necessarily want to spend so many years researching and trying to understand what's good and evil, right? Maybe those are things that a lot of people want to receive from elsewhere, sort of glued already.
Right. That's a great question. Well, first of all, one thing I would say is that I've watched so many kids play with Legos that they like putting stuff together. And they like being able to modify it and change it and do things their own way. And I think that the cultural changes that we're talking about, where because I'm old enough to, I'm a little older, I can remember how the extent to which some of these roles, okay, you're going to go out into this role, you're going to have the factory job, you're going to do that, so to the extent to which that was widely accepted and the extent to which it's crumbled away. And the reason for that cultural change is because it was tremendously appealing to a lot of people, the ability to make your own choices and set your own course in life. And there's an economic factor to how we got there too, which is, we're a much wealthier, especially in America, but I think globally too, we're living in a much wealthier society in most places, where, if you're living in a society where the range of jobs goes from, field hand to blacksmith, and you decide, I want to be a poet or an astronomer, well, good luck with that. It's going to be extremely difficult for you to pursue something else because the economic options are not really available. Living in a more educated, more wealthier society means you actually have more practical options that are open to you, and people find that tremendously appealing. But what I will say is, what I think we're grappling with, though, and we're seeing, I think, in the last decade or two, we're seeing kind of a backlash against that, is that is frightening to some people, or that is uncomfortable, and people don't want to do that, and they sort of resent it, and you get this sort of cultural backlash. But I'll also say, this is where, putting in terms of the fountainhead, if you don't do your own thinking on this, the problem is that you are then going to be preyed upon by people who are using your credulity, your willingness to take something pre-digested. You don't know who's giving that to you, why, for what purpose, what they're getting out of it. And to put it in terms of the fountainhead, there might be an Ellsworth Toohey there who's giving you all the answers pre-packaged because it serves his goals and his lust for power. And that's, I think, the case to be made to people is that we have to learn to do this. We have to get comfortable doing this, and sort of get over the newness in our society of this idea that you can make your own path in life, in order to avoid the problem of being sort of preyed upon or taken advantage by people who are very eager to give you a prepackaged way that your life is going to play out, but it's for their purposes and not yours.
So thank you again, Rob Trasinski. I gave you a promotion. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like below.